Hello and welcome to today's video. My name is Jeannie. I am a 6'2" self-projected projector. This video is actually going to be part 2 to a video that I did recently where I talk about the channel structuring, things I'm going a little bit deeper into, creating more awareness around, and mainly just like deciding and choosing very intentionally to what I call is like unleashing the power of my voice. And when I originally filmed that video, there was so much I felt like I wanted to say, but for some reason it wasn't flowing out like I wanted it to, and I was starting to get quite frustrated as I was filming. And then when I edited it and I was about to upload it, I actually kind of considered maybe not doing it because I felt like it was missing something and I couldn't quite pinpoint it, and I felt like I was a little bit like all over the place. But I'm like, you know what, you've already spent the time in filming it and editing it, might as well upload it. Like if it ends up like not being good, like people are just not going to watch it, and it's no big deal. So I decided to upload it, and I had someone leave a couple of comments below it, and I'm like, yes, thank you for sharing those comments, because they actually touched on pretty much a lot of what I originally wanted to include. And the thing is, like, I do have the channel awareness, and I feel like the insights drop in, and I have this habit of telling myself, oh, it's okay, like I'll remember later. And I don't always remember, or it kind of shifts a little bit from like how I felt like it dropped in. So now I'm working on being more intentional and writing down those little nuggets of inspiration when they drop in. But this is why, like, I'm so thankful that for those of you that do decide to comment, like, it really does help, because I'm like, yes, or it'll give me something to kind of like pull from and then create content. Or like, it's not even about really creating content. It's more like it'll give me more energy, I guess, is the way I'm seeing it, to play with, and things will come out a little bit differently or from a slightly different perspective. So that's basically what we're going to talk about. I'm going to take bits from those comments that were left, and I'm going to talk about it, and also include some of the things that I meant or I wanted to include in the original video and just didn't. So we're going to trust that this was supposed to be a two-part thing, and let's get started. Okay, I thought it was very interesting that they used this particular phrase, because it's not the first time I've heard it, and I'm creating more awareness around this to see like how it is that I operate in relation to other people. But they said, I think your experience pulled this out of me, and they were talking about how, like, just watching or listening to this video, they were able to pour out so much that was inside of them regarding this topic. But going back to this phrase of like pulling this out of them, I've had this comment made really frequently, like I've heard it recently, and it's giving me more insights of like, oh, my design like pulls things out of people. And I think it's very interesting. So that got me thinking about like the videos that don't perform as well as others, and I'm like, y'all are missing out, because like there's some really good nuggets in a lot of these, like even though they might not be like, I don't know, I feel like the videos on the channels have a little bit more views than like my Let's Talk About It series. So I don't know, I'm just saying, like, take a look at those and see if there's anything that pulls you towards them, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. But okay, the first thing they mentioned was being seen as entitled or looking down in people. In their life, they've perceived that a lot, and they actually got a comment about that recently. So let's talk about this feeling entitled, or others perceiving us as entitled. I do want to say that from a gene key perspective, I do have gene key 31, which is part of my incarnation cross, and there the shadow is arrogance. I feel like this could be where it's coming from. As a teenager, I felt like I never really went through a rebellious phase, like your traditional looking rebellious phase, but I do feel like as a teenager there was a lot of bitterness and resentment towards people. I think it's related to like the individual circuitry, feeling like I didn't belong, not having the social skills, not knowing how to learn the social skills, and things like that, where it was very like triggering for me that people couldn't see what I saw. And I didn't realize that was my gift. I thought that everybody had that ability. And it wasn't until my mom said, just because you can see this doesn't mean that everybody else picks up on this. And that kind of like stuck with me, and it was like, well, initially it wasn't. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, this is so obvious. How can they not see it? So I think maybe that's what people were picking up on, this sense of like arrogance of like, why don't they see this? But in a way, like this gene key, when we're dealing with like arrogance, it teaches you about humility through the pathway of leadership. I believe that's how you read the gene keys. Don't, I could be wrong. Anyways, okay, back then I definitely can see how I was arrogant. Like, there were times where like people would come up to me and they, want to start conversations, but the conversations felt like very small talk type of thing. And if you're a projector, you kind of know, like, we don't love small talk. Now I'm kind of like learning, and I'm like, I will, participate in small talk, even though it's not my favorite, because again, I'm teaching myself, okay, this is a very tribal collective thing to do. It helps you connect with people. You don't always have to go as deep, all this thing, but it definitely feels different when you are able to go deep with someone. It's a different energy. So there were times where like people would come up to me and I would literally kind of like just roll my eyes and walk away. I was horrible. And then my mom would always get on to me. It's like, you gotta be nicer because all this. And I couldn't understand why. But I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try. I wasn't really good at trying very hard. But anyways. And now I look back, I'm like, oh, okay, I can kind of see what they were talking about. So there was that. Like, I can own up to that like arrogance vibe. However, there's also this piece of, I don't know, like when I think of like the tribal energy and the collective energy, sometimes I'm like, I can't relate. Like, I just don't understand. But like, I'm learning. But I think I do have one of the gates on the throat that has to do with contribution. I think it's in the throat. I think it's in the throat. I could be wrong. But I felt like if there was nothing that I could contribute or wanted to contribute to the conversation, I didn't feel like it was worth my energy talking. This has to do with efficiency. As projectors, we're really big on efficiency, right? So many times it just felt like I have nothing to say, or maybe it was a conversation that wasn't intellectually motivating for me. And I think maybe that's where people could have also have been picking up on this entitlement vibe. Another part of me thinks, like, if we look at it a little bit differently, I am a line 2, and the line 2 can tend to experience the projection field. So part of me wonders, like, how much of it was them projecting onto me. Because when I really think about it, like, I don't consider myself entitled. But let me think about that for a second. Like, part of me wanted to use the word privilege, but I feel like that's also can be related to entitled. And I've thought about this before, and the word I feel like I resonate more with is blessed. Blessed in the sense that, like, I was always very much supported. I had a lot of support from my family, even though, like, back then nobody knew I was a projector. They did know that my energy levels weren't like everybody else's, so they really did honor that a lot. They never pressured me to keep up with them. They actually kind of like, adapted to me. They never pressured me to work, because when like they saw what that did to my body, a lot of burnout, a lot of adrenal issues and things like that, I just didn't quite understand where it was coming from. So for me, I felt more like I was really blessed, and for me, like, it was so normal and such a given to have that type of support from my family, that again, I didn't realize that this wasn't a thing for everyone. So I feel like many people perceive me as kind of like, oh, she's like the little rich girl, which whenever, like, I had an uncle who said, you're the little rich girl. That's his voice. I kind of think to myself, like, what is he talking about? Like, I don't consider, like, I never thought we had a lot of money. Like, we never really went without, but I knew how much was in our checking accounts and savings accounts. I'm like, I don't understand why he thinks we're rich, because like I don't consider ourselves to be rich. But that's how people perceive me, and it kind of ties into like this entitlement vibe. She thinks she's so much better than everyone, and I guess back then, like, that didn't really feel like the case, but I can kind of see how, like, energetically, by me thinking they don't see what I see, why don't they, when it's so obvious? A lot of bitterness, because, like, why don't they see it, not knowing about myself and these gifts, and seeing people through the lens of the gift instead of through the lens of the shadow. There was a lot of bitterness. So I think that's what people were picking up on. So yeah, that's kind of like where like I'll own a little bit of the entitlement, but I don't think it was completely like 100% on me. I think it was also like a little bit of projection. There were other like subtle energies that could very well have contributed to people feeling that vibe, that, yeah, okay, we'll just pause there. So from here, another thing that this person commented is that they started to think about how people might say that because they don't know how to approach us. They don't know a way to connect with us, and they're waiting for us to come to them to initiate. But as projectors, we're waiting to see who sees us and is willing and open to accept even our freakiness. Oh my gosh, there's so much like in here that I'm like, yes, that's exactly it. And this was also on my list to film about, and I kind of forgot about it. But okay, let's talk about how this first part. People might say that because they don't know how to approach us. Yes, I feel like this comes from like the individual circuitry, and I know this person has a lot of individual circuitry. I feel like our charts have a lot of similarities. So yes, okay. I have noticed, or what I feel happens is with the individual circuitry, because we are really like individuals, like we focus more on like the individual experience. We don't really care about the tribal experience or the collective experience. Even though we are a part of the tribe and we are a part of the collective, it doesn't always feel like it, but we are. So with pure individual energy, it feels to me like sometimes people feel intimidated. This is like what I pick up on. There was one time where, this is the example that came to mind, at church, and I was just standing, minding my own business, and then all of a sudden, like, for some reason, my focus was drawn to this one man in particular, and I felt him kind of, like, go a little bit like this. He's kind of, like, debating inside his head. That's what it felt like to me. Whether or not to approach me. How I knew that he wanted to approach me, I won't say it's the knowing circuitry, but I had this knowing, like, oh, I feel like he wants to say something to me, but I picked up on, like, I think he feels intimidated. Like, he's a little bit scared because, like, he doesn't know how to approach me or how to tell me. So I just kind of, like, observe him. I don't think he was aware that, I saw that little bit. So he approaches me and is like, hey, how are you? I wanted to ask you if you were up for volunteering for this, and that. So, I thought that was interesting because I felt kind of like his hesitation, and like I felt like he didn't know how to come up to me and ask me. Where in my mind I'm like, well, I'm just a normal human being. Like, just come up to me and ask me whatever you want or whatever you need to ask me. Like, I'm not gonna bite your head off. But I have received this comment in the past of like how people find me intimidating. I don't, I haven't like, this is another thing that's quite hard for me to understand because I don't necessarily get to experience what it's like to be around my energy, because like I'm around my energy all the time, so it feels very normal to me. But other people, obviously, they pick up on different things, and a lot of it could be like their own stuff, right? So I am mindful to not take on like more responsibility than I need to. But I do notice this theme of people kind of like not knowing how to approach me or wanting to, but kind of like afraid of the reaction I might have. And when I say reaction, like it's not like I bite their heads off, but there can be, because I guess, I mean, I want to say this is where it's coming from. Individual circuitry has this lack of caring. The channel of structuring tends to blurt things out without really like pausing to consider, wait, how could this person take it? Or like, am I being too blunt or too harsh or too direct, which I don't think there's anything wrong with being direct, but I don't know, I feel like the tribe and the collective are a little bit more of like beating around the bush. And I'm like, time is of the essence here, like just tell me like directly what it is that you want. um so that's where I see like it's coming from. It's more like, oh, okay, there's this energy that I know I do have. Don't waste my time. I hate it. I hate it when people waste my time. And I've had to reevaluate like what I consider a waste of time. And a lot of this has to do with like tribal and collective things of like wanting to connect with people just because. Like there doesn't have to be like a deeper conversation or a deeper meaning other than like I just wanted to say hello and see how you were doing. Okay, so in that aspect, I can see how, some people might hesitate to approach me because of that. And I feel like sometimes they can describe it like as a coldness, like you're really cold. But it's more, I see it more like I'm direct, I'm saving you time, I'm saving me time. So I'm learning to kind of like warm up a little bit and slow down. I've found recently that I'm very splenic in a way. There's a lot of aspects of my chart that have a lot of splenic themes to them, and it's very like survival based. So I'm learning to slow down and see the value in connecting with people and not being so direct and being more warm and loving. And you can already feel how like the energy shifts. Like it feels more grounded, more open, more loving, as opposed to like, let's get this done. Very like, yeah, different energies. So I wrote here in my notes because this is something that I wanted to talk about before, and I forgot. But this people not knowing how to approach us. A while ago, I talked on my stories about smell cognition. Well, it didn't start with me talking about smell cognition. I was sharing how, from my personal experience, there have been times where when I wasn't in the right environment, my body would start to smell a little bit flinky, but it wasn't something that I necessarily picked up on. And I was sharing how like I was in this environment where I was really struggling to fit in and to like find my place. Story of my life, pure individual. But it was the weirdest thing because people started commenting how like I smelled. And I had someone in particular, like they nominated someone to go talk to me. They pulled me aside. This was in a church setting, so just so you can kind of get a visual. And they brought this up, and he's like, hey, just wanted, to first of all let you know that I care about you. There's a lot of people here who care about you, but we've noticed that you smell kind of bad. And, I'm concerned for you because maybe it might be a medical condition that you might want to get checked out. Maybe there's something going on that you're not aware of and things like that. But as they were talking to me, like when they pulled me aside, I thought, oh my gosh, maybe they're going to invite me somewhere, feeling super excited. Never in a million years did I think that's what they wanted to talk about. So as they're saying this, I can kind of imagine, like I had this look on my face trying to understand, like I knew what they were saying, but I'm like, where the hell is this coming from? Like, what is going on here? First, like, that's not pleasant. Like, being told you smell, that does something to a person. Let me tell you, like, if I had social anxiety before, like, it went way through the roof after that. So, as they're talking to me, I can kind of feel like there's something more to this. And that it wasn't necessarily coming from this person. My spidey senses are starting to come on, and all these things are going through my head, and I'm feeling into this situation, even though back then, like, I didn't realize that's what I was doing, something that I've always done. So, I just kind of like, I didn't really say much. I'm like, okay, let me take this with me. And as I'm coming out of this little two-person meeting, I'm like, I'm ready to get out of here, because like if people think or telling me, or like if I smell, like I do not want to be around people, because like I don't know what's going on. I don't smell it. So I'm walking past the lobby on my way out, like tears are rolling down my face, and there's this other lady who I had already noticed there was a shift. With this person originally, we had like not super close, but they were friendly, and then I noticed that if I was sitting in a particular place, they would very intentionally move. Or in the Hispanic culture, we're used to like greeting each other with a kiss on the cheek, and they stopped doing that, and they literally just would go like this, like put a distance and put the hand. I'm like, okay, there's something going on here, but they never really said anything. So I'm like, okay, well, they didn't say anything. Maybe I'm making things up. I wasn't making things up. That should have been my first, I should have trusted myself back then, at that first instance. But anyways, this lady that had kind of already started to form these physical boundaries with me, as I'm walking out, she calls out my name and she asks me a question. And it was the way she asked me the question, kind of like, hey, how are you? Or like, hope you have a good day. Something like that I picked up on, like, okay, this is where it's coming from. This is the person that kind of started everything. And she didn't have the guts or the decency or whatever word you want to use to come to me directly. That's what pissed me off the most. That's what pissed me off the most, that they nominated someone who I might receive this better from. It was more of that, like, I felt it was disrespectful. Like, I don't know, I'm more of the type, like, if I have an issue with someone, or like I don't know. I kind of also have this rule with my brother. Like, I'd rather hear it from you than find out from somebody else. I feel like that's respectful. That's the least I deserve. So, anyways, that's what happened. I get home. I tell my mom what happened. And she's kind of like, what are they talking about? So, anyways, I'm asking my mom, like, do I smell? Like, are you picking up on anything? And back then, like, yeah, it took me like a half an hour to get there. On the weekends, I was a little bit more rushing around. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe I don't really have much time to shower in between things, but I'm like, this doesn't make sense. Like, for it to smell that bad, like, I feel like I would pick up on it, or like, why isn't mom picking up on it? So we're having this discussion, trying to figure out like what the hell's going on. And she's like, you know what, I don't smell anything. And I feel like, okay, I don't want to make this story any longer than it needs to, but now that I've like been going into human design, I've found this piece of information that says that like this is something that happens more with mental projectors, and on my unconscious side, I do have the design of a mental projector. So I'm thinking that's where it could be coming from. Mental projectors have this thing that's called like body awareness. If your body doesn't feel safe, or the environment isn't safe for your body, it can start doing funky or weird things. One of them being it can start to smell bad. Back then I didn't know this. This would have been super useful because then I wouldn't have been so hard on myself. The social trauma wouldn't have been as extreme as it was, but in a way, like, I'm thankful because it helped me learn a lot of lessons. But anyways, where I'm going with all this is that when we don't feel safe, it's not always about us. It could very well be the environment. That's not where we're supposed to be. And it's not necessarily also that the environment is bad. I see it more now as like the environment, that's not where you're being recognized, and that's not where you're being valued. You know, in this church setting, it wasn't like that with everyone. There were some people, like I remember there was this other lady who asked me if like I worked a lot with vitamins, and she mentioned like I kind of like smell vitamins off of you. But she didn't say it in a way that felt like she was offended. It felt more like, even though you smell like vitamins, I still love you and accept you. Where before, or like in the other example with this group of people, it was more like, you smell bad, there's probably something wrong with you health wise, and you should go get that checked out because it's offending us. It was disguised as like, maybe, there's a health issue, we want you to be healthy, but I was picking up on more like, this is offensive to us, and we don't accept you and love you because you smell. So, okay, this is a conversation let's circle back. The conversation I was having on my stories on how our body can sometimes let us know when we're not in the right environment, it's not safe for us, we're not being recognized, and things like that. And I had several people who were smell cognition make comments around how like they always thought that when they were picking up on smell from someone, like this a bad smell, they were taught, or like the way the material presented, it's like that person isn't safe for them. They had never stopped to consider whether or not that person felt safe in the environment. And I loved that they were able to share that and come up with that piece of awareness, because one of the things that really triggered me, and I don't want to use the word triggered either, because I feel like it's pretty common sense, that I feel like I experienced a lot in that particular church environment, was that nobody was asking what their part in all of this was. Because at another instance, this one didn't really have anything to do with smell, but I was kind of pulled aside by like two of the leaders of the church, and one of the things that they mentioned was like, we noticed that you don't really interact with the group, and you're kind of like very antisocial, and we want to encourage you to mingle more with the people and open up and things like this. And during the whole time, like, I was just talked at, and I started crying back then. During that time, mom was sick. There were things about that I wasn't sharing with anyone, because I wanted to respect mom's privacy. By then, I'm not sure if the smell conversation had already come up, so that kind of already put me on like this very vulnerable state of like, how can I feel safe being around people if I don't know if they're like, if I smell bad to them and they're just not saying anything because they're being nice. Like, I didn't want to make them feel uncomfortable. I didn't want to have to experience, that type of rejection. So all this time, like, I'm crying, and I was so angry when I walked out of that meeting because I'm like, in all of this, like, they never stopped to ask me, how do you feel? Why are you having such a hard time? Like, or are you having a hard time, or is it just our perception? Or what can we do to make it easier for you to interact with people. What they didn't know is like how hard I was trying to open up and interact with people, and it wasn't working. And back then, like, I did have a lot of beliefs of like, I feel invisible, like nobody's inviting me, nobody's, like they make their plans right in front of me as if I'm not there. A lot of bitterness, a lot of not knowing to wait for the invitation, a lot of not knowing to wait in silence, look out for who is recognizing me. I focused more on the people that weren't and trying to like, well, why don't I like prove myself, undefined ego, things like that. So in this conversation, in the stories on Instagram, I loved how this person shared that they never stopped to think about that it was maybe the person that wasn't feeling safe around them. So there's that piece. And then another thing that dropped in, as we're having this conversation with different people giving slightly different perspectives. What dropped in was that it could be that for like a small cognition person, someone like me, for example, who is pure individual, has a lot of individual circuitry, has a lot of gates in that fourth quarter of mutation, someone like me might not feel safe for them, and smell is a way of like warning them to stay away from me, but not in a way that is like bad. It's just like I am someone who can pick up on a person's shadows. I don't necessarily love that phrase, but just so we can kind of like simplify the language a little bit. I am someone who can very, very easily see through people. I feel like this comes from the 44. I'm really good at reading people, and I recently had this one-to-one session where I was addressing some neck issues, and one of the really big themes that they brought up, which I was really thankful for because I had never really gone deeper into this aspect, is masks, like how people wear masks, and they're like, you see through the mask, and people don't like that. And then that brought up a lot of stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're absolutely right. I just never seen it as a gift. I'd seen it more as like a curse because of the repercussions it had on me, mainly in social related things. So what I see happening is that, like, let's say this person is small cognition, and I come into their environment or their awareness, and there's something that's there that they might not be aware of, but I pick up on it, and it's going to be perceived as a threat if the ego doesn't want to be called out. That's the word I'm looking for. Called out. So it's kind of like this two-way thing. I see it like as a two-way street, because before I used to take way too much responsibility. So if you are small cognition and you've experienced this, I would kind of invite you to, not ignore your intuition. Obviously, there will be some instances where it's very like survival based. Like, is this person coming towards me to like cause physical harm? Yes, by all means, like run away, get help, whatever it is that you need to do. But if you're kind of seeing, okay, this person doesn't seem, like they're here to cause me harm, what is it about them that feels threatening to me? And or what are they, how are they perceiving me where they don't feel safe, and this is the reaction their body is having? Because it could be instead of like the small cognition person thinking that this person is a threat for them, it's more like for the pure individual, this person is a threat to them because they're not going to be loved and accepted for who they are. Again, you would have to feel into each particular situation to see which is the case. But what I'm saying, or what I guess my point of saying all of this is that kind of like pausing and saying, okay, if there's no real danger, what's going on here? What's going on beneath the surface? And this can be something that could be very healing and very like life-changing for both parties. And also, like, there will be times where it's just letting you know you guys aren't a good fit, and it's okay. Like, everyone can go their own ways, but there's no longer that there's no longer this feeling of like I'm doing something wrong or there's something wrong with me. I think I covered everything I wanted to say with that piece of small cognition.